That's quite a tricky question. I think anyone should be able to choose their own destiny. So I choose yes. You can choose to die.
I would go for yes. Yeah, people should be able to choose if they want to continue living or they want to end their lives.
Oh, hey, this is a really tough question. This is like an old debate as long as time. You yourself, you want the choice?
I want the choice.
Okay, so. Well, my instinctive answer is yes. Okay, can you come with me? I'm going to meet Jana. So let's see what Jana has to say about our topic.
Hi,
It's nice to see you. You look lovely. Here's our next shooter's card.
Can I choose to die? I don't want to die. But if I can choose, that's a philosophical question, you know, Barry.
Generally speaking, I think no. We have to choose to live.
So welcome to the program, shooters. Hope you had a good week. So many topics of debate that are hotly contested around the world, and this week's issue, of course, is no exception: euthanasia, an old age debate. We're going to begin, as always, with a roundtable discussion where everyone will get a chance to hear and also air their opinions, and then we'll reach a unified decision. Of course, the question is, shooters asks, can I choose to die? Very, very sensitive question. But recently came up in the news because in France, a deep sleep bill was passed through Parliament, and the bill essentially allows doctors to stop treatment for terminally ill patients and sedate them so that all treatment is halted and they're in a deep sleep until they naturally pass away. Critics are saying this is just euthanasia in thin disguise. And others argue that it's a great bill that will ease the pain of people who do not need to needlessly suffer. So shooters, what is your opinion on this? Why don't we begin with Jan, since it originated in France?
This law was passed because it's been a big problem in France for a big discussion. In 2014, an actual French doctor was acquitted after poisoning terminally ill patients, so actually practicing euthanasia. And he was acquitted, so there was a law that needed to be put in place.
So I heard that some people are saying this is just euthanasia under a thin disguise. It's putting them into a sleep, but actually it's euthanasia.
Well, I do think it's euthanasia, but it's kind of just paving the way to, I think, the terminal law, which is going to be, it's fine, like Belgium or other companies.
Does the doctor administer this, or are they able to do it
Yes, it's
themselves?
doctor.
Okay.
You know, the thing that troubles me when I hear about these things, I mean, I've conflicted, right, about this question, but when I think about doctors who originally take an oath to heal people and help people, and then kind of opening, like you say, paving the way forward, opening the doors down this slippery slope of doctors killing people, and sort of with government controls, I get an uneasy feeling about it.
But then again, what is the role of doctors? What is the role of physicians here, right? Is it to basically save everyone, or is it to ease people's suffering, or is it to grant people their wishes, as in, you know, to what way they want to live and die?
Death is actually not a bad thing.
But how you know that this law is not misused? For example, there are nephews or grandchildren waiting for grandparents
Well, there should be a
die
system in
for the
place.
inheritance questions, or
Well, that's why we're doing a law, in order to, if you make it very specific, like for example in certain countries, in Belgium for example, you have to, before you're actually terminally ill, when you're sane before, you actually sign something saying, I agree that if I happen to be terminally ill, you can kill me.
Speaking of Belgium, by the way, Belgium has legalized euthanasia for children.
Yeah, for children.
That's right. For and children of any age, they definitely have the most progressive euthanasia laws. But it absolutely doesn't surprise me that 96% of the French population who agrees with that law, because who wouldn't, realistically, if you're in that circumstance? Imagine you're in inconceivable pain and you get the option just to slip away quietly without going through days or weeks or months of
Well, I think the people
pain
that are
and agony.
against that is, I guess sometimes it's because of religion, I guess. You kind of, God decides who dies, you don't.
But also, I think the religious approach is basically that you don't really own your body and it belongs to like supreme being, to God or whatever.
Right.
So you're not supposed to take your own life because it doesn't even belong to you. Right?
But I mean, 96% of the French citizens agree with this bill, but the Netherlands is also known for its progressive laws on euthanasia. 90% support euthanasia, but in fact only 20% say they would actually take their own life in that manner. So grand majority say, yes, euthanasia is good, but when it comes down to themselves, only 1 in 5 would actually do it.
What was the question that was posed to them? Under what circumstances
If you feel like you're being stabbed every second, would you rather die?
Exactly.
No, but when it becomes personal, I think it's a different issue, no?
I think it depends on the person, once again, right? So it's a personal preference, whether you would prefer actually to go peacefully and you're willing to give up your life in that aspect because you no longer want to live.
I would question the ethics in that, though, because when someone is faced with a terminal illness or they're going to maybe pass away in a couple of months, psychologically, that's got to do something different to you to where maybe you might not be able to make the right decisions. I actually believe myself, I would agree with Kevin a lot that it's a slippery slope. I mean, one thing great about this program is that we all have different views, and the questions that we pose here aren't so easily answered black and white.
It's controversial.
So where we can discuss the pros and cons and maybe come to a consensus.
You should definitely have a choice in that, and I think if you could make that choice prior to be ill, I think that could resolve.
But why do you think you have right to make choice about another human's life?
No, that's what I'm saying.
That's a different
It's not
type
about
of-
another human.
A different so if you're choosing euthanasia for somebody else, then that's a whole, there's lots of other issues there. But if we're just talking about for yourself, okay, your own right to choose how your life is lived or how your life is ended, then of course, absolutely.
So
who
maybe
who
we
has
have
the right to take that away
be
from you?
Clear with terms. Are we talking about voluntary euthanasia for yourself, or are we talking non-voluntary for somebody else?
Basically, when you're signing, when you're signing the kind of organ donating type form, right?
Yeah.
You should have another one saying,
That's a fantastic idea.
I
You
think
could actually
Jana
kill me.
hit it on the head very closely, that we need to distinguish euthanasia in essence is kind of like a mercy killing. It's like it's like a coup de grace, like a long time ago during wartime, where you'd like put an animal out of its misery because it's suffering. But what you're actually referring to right now is physician-assisted suicide, which is actually a clear distinction with euthanasia. It's a little bit different because euthanasia in essence is them putting someone out of their misery, or
But
someone else.
it's also voluntary usually. When we talk about euthanasia, I think most people, from what we've seen in media and documentary and whatnot, it's usually when the patient is terminally ill, there's no chance for the patient to get better, their suffering is intense, and therefore they ask for a physician or someone to help them to die.
Because the French doctor was acquitted because the actual patients wanted to die, and the families around them were supporting the doctors as well. So if everyone wants this, why not?
The specifics of the law are that they lose consciousness, right? I mean, what's the difference, let's just speculate, between allowing somebody to go into deep sleep, lose consciousness, versus medications that treat the pain but allow consciousness to remain?
Yeah, that's.
I mean, why isn't that a better alternative? Possibly.
I think it's also very subjective to know how much pain that they're in. How can you determine that? There's enough research out there that says if you are the patient in that position, how do you gauge how much pain that they are in?
Well, if you
And to what point? Because if you legalize euthanasia, then it's going to open Pandora's box to many other things as well.
So this
such
is the
as-
slippery
like
slope
what?
argument. So yeah, where does the slippery slope take us? What's at the bottom of the slippery slope? Give us the worst case scenario.
I think Nazi Germany was
Right,
probably
Nazi,
the prime
so what
example
that's
of that.
involuntary euthanasia, right? So essentially that's genocide,
Yeah.
right? So,
Yeah.
but we're not really talking about genocide, right? This is we're a modern, well-balanced society with all sorts of checks and balances.
The Nazis
and our
thought they
different
were as
institutions.
well. They thought they were a modern, fully
I don't think
civilized
the
society.
project that they were engaged in was entirely different, wasn't it? So first of all, they went for the old, they went for the homosexuals, they went for the poor, they went for people of different backgrounds. So they're not euthanizing people because they're in extreme pain or because they have a terminal
that's completely
illness.
different, yeah.
Okay,
Two different
so as a slippery slope argument, involuntary euthanasia just doesn't happen really in a modern society, a well-functioning modern society, right? So
Well, what about the element of choice? Because if
Yeah.
people do have a sort of sentience, right, and it's balanced, let's say before they become terminally
Yeah.
ill, I mean, that's maybe a good example of somebody making their own choice. What about in the case of children? Or what about in the case of people who can't really make that choice anymore?
What about in the case
That's
of children? I mean,
very-
children who suffer from terminally ill illnesses or who are suffering from severe pain and they're actually suffering, right? This is a good question, I think. Does it also apply to children or does it only apply to elderly and people above
Well, we
a
can
certain
talk
age?
about that Chilean teenager, right, who was recently in the news. She
Yeah.
has cystic fibrosis, and she wrote a public letter to the president asking for permission to die.
It turned into
What
a
happened?
viral YouTube
Right.
video.
Yeah,
I don't know
yeah.
if you guys
So
saw
what
that.
was the result of her?
So what
arrest?
happened is she asked the president to allow her to die, where the government refused. But the numerous support that came online after that, because she had thought that she would get support that, hey, allow me to die, but it was exactly the opposite. To whereas people were supporting her and saying, you have so much to live for, and then people that actually had, I wouldn't say survived, but at least has been going through the same situation, people with cystic fibrosis that had survived were
See,
coming in and meeting her and
yes.
helping
Yeah,
her.
but euthanasia
Yeah,
should
yeah,
not be
yeah.
the first choice. It should be, of course, there
Of
should be
course,
some
yeah.
sort of psychological
And I think actually
thing.
this is a little bit like judgmental, saying that, oh, you can like challenging those people and saying that you're not doing enough, you have so much to live for. It's a little bit patronizing, I think, because no one actually has lived their lives. No one's going through whatever they are going through. So I don't think people should be saying
I don't think
stuff
like
like this. I mean,
3,000
I
likes
don't
on
think they
Facebook
appreciate.
is gonna
But the
make
story of the
something.
Chilean teenager has a twist. The fact
Yes.
is, she got a visit from the president, right? And did she decide to end her
she
life?
changed her
Not
mind.
She
to end
changed
her
her
life.
mind. That's the thing.
Of course,
right.
if she changed her mind,
When was
that's-
that then?
That's
Yeah.
perfect. I mean,
That
that's
was
her.
most
That's her
recently.
choice.
That was the
That's
latest
point.
Still
update.
alive, or-
Yes, she said she changed her mind after meeting someone who had lived with the disease for over 5 years, or who had outlived doctors' expectations, and she received a
So
lot of
she
hope
was
and
not
support.
in unbearable pain.
But she might have been
You
at
can't
one
say
point,
that, of
right? I mean, she
course.
might have
Yes.
gone through the unbearable pain. She might have been in a place where we think it's not going to end, it's terminal. The best thing we can do to give her mercy and relief is end her life. And then because we can't predict the future, none of us can, she came through, right? So that's the thing. It's like, how do we know whether something is really terminal? Sometimes these
We know
situations
when
Yeah, of
something
course.
is really
Maybe
terminal.
in this
But we can't predict the
respect,
future.
we should talk
The
about
lifespan is unpredictable.
dignity and
Yeah,
quality of
absolutely.
life.
Yeah.
Because quality of life is understandable by in different ways by different people, and it's quality. What is quality life for Indian people is not quality life maybe for European people.
Or Palestinian
Uh,
people, for example.
Yes, and who says that the life in pleasure should be the only quality life? I would think about Stephen Hawking.
Stephen Hawking, yeah.
Yeah, Stephen Hawking, your famous compatriot.
Yeah. We're like
Do you think this is
yeah,
life full of dignity? What do you think about his quality of life? He cannot speak. He's in terrible,
Yeah.
maybe pain, we don't know. he's disconnected with the world. He can communicate just through computer, but nevertheless, he made the greatest discoveries.
I don't think we can evaluate someone else's quality of life. It's up to them to decide whether their life is good enough for them to continue living
that's
it or
part of
not.
the question.
Example.
That's part of the question when it comes to children or people who are in a state where we don't think that they have a clear state of mind, right? I mean, when it's a clear choice, it becomes easier to discuss, but I think it's these peripheral cases that where it becomes really sticky, right? And tricky. Yeah.
But Stephen Hawking, I think that's an interesting example because he's obviously achieved these remarkable things. However, and I've genuinely thought this even before I knew this was our topic for discussion, had I been in a similar circumstance, I was afflicted with the same disease, I expect quite strongly that I would have tried to opt out one way or another, whether by asking a doctor for some injection or whatever, or taking matters into my own hands. I genuinely, I wouldn't want to live
if you're about to solve the mysteries of the universe, you probably wouldn't want to die right now.
Yeah, I wasn't anywhere close to that.
Yeah, but we don't all have to make the same decisions. But I think we need to acknowledge the humanitarian aspect of euthanasia, which is basically easing the suffering of those who are terminally ill. And then secondly, there's the bodily autonomy, that your body actually belongs to you, and I think that's very empowering.
That's
and I think,
right.
This is your right. I own my body because if I don't own my body, then what about other topics who are highly controversial, like rape, right? Or abortion, or anything else. So I think we need, for me, it's very important to highlight that the bodily autonomy, and that's a matter of personal choice. And I think having more options is always better than not having any options. So not everyone needs to opt in and opt in into euthanasia, but those who want should have the chance to do it. Yeah.
And there was a gentleman, last name Pistorius, from South Africa, who at the age of 12 fell into an undiagnosable coma randomly. It's called locked-in syndrome.
Yeah.
He essentially turned into a mental and physical vegetable, and the doctors suggested, this is it. He's gone. You should let him go. Euthanasia case. After about a couple years, he regained consciousness, but was unable to communicate or move. It took him several more years, probably over a decade, before he was actually able to communicate with his family again through a computer. And so here's a clear-cut case where he falls into the category of suffering, intractable, a child in the care of his parents, and they had the full probable rights under some of these precepts that we laid forth to terminate his life, and he was actually kind of just trapped in his own body. There's always going to be outliers, right? But those outliers are important, I think, to think about the core of the issue.
I think humans are more biased towards life, so you will hear more about these cases and less about the cases where they just did not wake up.
Yeah, because if it didn't go well, then
no one's gonna
a long time ago.
No one's gonna talk about this because this is depressing.
But don't you agree that mass media has kind of romanticized euthanasia? There's been several documentaries and films that sort of put euthanasia in a romantic light. Me Before You, that famous novel that was kind of a big hit. Again, that was a huge euthanasia case as well.
There was a case also, I think it's in Belgium, where a couple, an elderly couple, just decided to end their lives on the same day which they got married. So I agree with you to a certain extent.
And does that not affect people's decision in whether or not to accept euthanasia, or whether it's just putting it into this romantic light?
Yeah, totally. I guess.
Is that fair?
Yeah, maybe only people that actually witness that type of case should be able to vote on that. I don't know.
Well, I think
it's complicated to.
It's a counter-reaction,
outlier cases that tend to be made into movies. Okay, so it's the extreme examples which have riper potential for emotional manipulation that get made into films, right? So it's not the run-of-the-mill, everyday cases which affect most people, right? But there was a movie, a French movie about the diving bell and the butterfly. And I can't remember the name.
The diving bell and the butterfly. That's the right title.
But it was a true story about a middle-aged French man who was a very successful fashion photographer or fashion clothes designer or magazine, fashion magazine.
All French guys. Right.
Yes. But actually, it was very interesting because he accessed his life before his accident through beautiful women. Okay, so he had lots of affairs and lots of relationships. Okay, he had an accident, a random, out of the blue accident, and the only thing he could move after his accident was his eyelids. Was one of his eyelids. That was the only way.
One eyelid.
One eyelid. Okay, that was the only way that he could communicate. And he eventually wrote a book, The Diving Bell and the Butterfly. Okay, they worked out a series of ways that he could use his eyelid, just blinking to communicate.
He wrote a book by blinking.
He wrote a book by
Very
blinking about the nature of that. Incidentally, the person he dictated it to was a very beautiful nurse, so he was still accessing.
Was she winking back? Or?
Accessing the world through beautiful women. However,
sure he
what
wasn't
about
just
someone
winking?
in that situation,
Winking.
in that
Flirting.
circumstance? I wouldn't want to live the rest of my life in that sort of compromised position. He's remarkable. Exactly. That's your only way that you can access the world, that you can interact with the world. Here I am, I'm telling you, if that happens to me, do me a favor, okay? Just help me out, because I don't want to live
but
in
imagine
that
if-
situation.
If you had a hot nurse
If he couldn't
in
communicate,
front of you.
if he couldn't communicate,
And you were
this
French.
law was
And I was
passed,
French.
he would have died, right?
Yeah.
If he couldn't communicate and this law was passed,
Yeah.
and he
The person
said
in charge of
before, he
you.
said, please kill me.
But then
And he
again,
changed his mind, but he couldn't communicate it. That's where the problem
but
is.
also, how do we know that he was
Yes,
saying
that's
what he was
problem.
saying
Yes,
if he was only like blinking?
He wrote a whole book.
By
He
blinking.
didn't
Still
just make up.
Yeah,
One blink for yes,
so like,
two blinks
no,
for
but letters of the
that's
alphabet.
true.
Sure, do that.
So they had
The wrong words though.
Okay.
Maybe
They
the whole
had
book was
boards,
opposite of what he was meant to
Yeah, he was like, I didn't say that.
I think we can, I think we can go on and on with this topic. And euthanasia is such a personal and yet very universal topic. It's a matter of life or death. And right now we're talking about an issue about others, but any day it could become a personal issue, one that's very close to us. So the question, of course, was, do I have a right to choose when and how I die? That is the question. So we now need to come to a decision. What do you think, the shooters? Have there been any shifts in opinions? Let's start off with, I have the right to choose how and when I die. Okay, again, split down the middle. And the other three, of
my
course,
favorite member
you do
too.
not believe in that. Okay, now it's time to head to your
say that
respective
to everyone.
armories. The team that you believe that you have a right will go here, and the other team onto the other side, okay? Into your respective
I'm
armories
in the
now.
team with Barry. My mom's going to be happy. So I think we could link it to the human rights.
But also have the right to choose.
You have your autonomy over
Yeah.
your body, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly, right?
It's actually possible to regulate euthanasia with a good system.
Selfish of people
It's selfish.
to deny other people the right to die.
We should have laws that make it probably safe.
Yeah, regulation would be a good answer for use.
When you don't give someone an option,
So clarity of choice.
Because this decision cannot be revoked.
How can you make a decision when you're facing death, when you're facing that panic?
it could open Pandora's box to
Pandora's
many
box.
other things.
We don't actually control the creation of life.
Life is pure suffering, but they find something out of it.
Natural arc. And that as we transition into death, that's not something we have the right to step.
So shooters, are you armed and ready? You're back from your armories, and this time, any changes in your opinions will be measured by a gauge. So every time your opposing team says something that you find reasonable or persuasive, you press on the minus switch. If someone on your team says something that's persuasive, you press on the plus team. You all start at 100% on each side. Of course, on my right, it's the yes team. You say people have a right to choose to die. So would you like to make a first sort of opening argument?
Yes. Sure. So we believe basically the right to die is a fundamental human right because it is derived from the right to live. And as a human being, you have the right to life. Hence, you should also have the right to choose how to live. Of course, the freedom of choice. And you should also have the right to choose to end your life since it's yours and it's, your bodily autonomy, it's your freedom of choice, and it's your right to life. So based on these human rights, fundamental human rights, with which most human beings agree on, we believe that the right to die in euthanasia should be a fundamental human right.
And the no team, how would you like to respond to that? Or do you have your own statement?
I think, I think we have a couple personal statements, but to summarize, while we fully agree with this idea of choice and autonomy of the individual, we feel that we're dealing with an issue that's so big and so intimate and so important that we have to discuss it and think about it in the most personal and actually intimate terms. And rather than thinking about whether the abstract choice should exist, thinking about the people that we love in our lives and whether and how we want to see them die. So we argue that we should not have the choice to die because, well, maybe in summary, we actually don't create life ourselves.
But I have
So
a
despite
question- a question
so
to
for
you.
that reason, because we don't create life, we don't think that we should terminate it. What we have control of is what's in the middle there.
So you mentioned the people that we love, right? And we want to see them, you know, we don't want to see them die, but do you want to see them living and
care of you.
suffering?
I think one of the biggest things that I walk away from your position is that euthanasia is okay because it alleviates immense suffering. That's essentially the key point, is that
Yes.
suffering, because of that, that's the one and only reason why we can kill somebody. To me, that defines life in terms of suffering. That if that's the only way we determine life, shall we just seek pleasure? Is life a life well lived one that has avoided suffering? So for me, that's probably the most dangerous part of the position, is that we've defined life in a very narrow range of suffering, which I don't think we agree with.
And we're
do you have a
discussing
specific
immense
definition
suffering.
but how do you define that then? Immense suffering.
Immense suffering is an illness that is uncurable and that it also is accompanied by severe pain, which the patient can no longer function normally or, just be a normal human being that does normal things.
But normal, that means people who are abnormal should die?
No. I mean,
life. That's not life.
We're talking unbearable pain.
But
And
you
a terminal
know, now
illness.
medicine is so much developed. Like when you're giving birth to baby, now you don't have pain. There is so many types of painkillers. There is epidural anesthesia, which is inserting medicine into your spine, and you're in the right mind, you're moving, but no pain.
I think we could
Argument.
alternatively look at it and we could say that actually I think lots of modern societies have a very misguided notion of what death actually is. And realistically, embracing or engaging with how we end our lives is actually a very sensible and very adult and a very morally responsible way of dealing with what death is and how we understand it as adults in a modern society, okay? We have to recognize what death is and what it does to an individual. And we don't often see depictions of that in our media. And I think if we did see realistic depictions of that, if we encountered it personally, lots of doctors who do see these people dying in pain for prolonged periods of time, they agree with what euthanasia is and how it should be enacted. And I think that's something that we have to engage with as responsible adults in a modern society. We have to recognize what death is, what it does to people, how it can reduce their quality of life, how it can reduce them as an individual. Imagine that, having your individuality stripped from you in the last months of your life.
And if you're in a terminal illness, you're affecting everyone around you, and you could literally be destroying people's dreams. If a wife wanted to have an amazing career, but you're stuck forever and she has to take care of you, maybe you would be helping her out in her life or dreams.
But isn't that an incentive for death based on material sort of pursuits like career? I mean, career is important, right? But as soon as we tie
It's not career, it's
as
just
soon as we tie it in.
her life.
like burdening
Join.
other people.
Yes.
with-
Burdening, that's
yeah.
very good point. Euthanasia because of burdening other people.
Thank you.
Right. So do you have like a dollar amount that you assign to where it crosses a line of acceptable burden, possibly to,
I think
at
it's an
this-
individual thing. It's up to everyone to decide. In each case, it's subjective.
But
and
isn't that depressing to say that there's a dollar amount on our lives that's
it's sad,
acceptable?
but yet it's real. Some people can't afford treatment and for themselves, and this is why people.
Let me
sometimes
ask you
die.
this.
I'll go there.
Have you ever been immediately, directly affected by death where you had to think about it personally? Maybe
course.
you've had death in the family. If a family member asks you on a personal level as well, would it be okay that I want to die? Would you allow me to do that? What would your answer be?
I would ask why. Why do you want to die?
But
If
that's
your
part of a
family-
very mature, very responsible conversation that adults should have with each other. So in the case of an event, should something happen to me, what would you want
If your
to...
family member says because of financial burden,
No, of course not.
Financial
That's-
burden.
That's not why euthanasia exists. Not because of financial burdens. It exists
But
because
that's part of it, right?
So what kind of
Unbearable
burden
pain.
are you talking? You keep talking about burden.
we can talk about emotional burden too. You know, it's not easy for family members to see their loved ones suffering. It's not an
But
easy.
there is a natural arc of life, and I think it was either Barry or Jan mentioned that in those last couple months when you're stripped from your dignity, I think what that does is says in the middle of your life when you're in your mid 30s or 40s, you're healthy, you go for a run. That's what life is really all about. And at the end of life, when we're actually growing physically weak, that's not a part of normal life, which I disagree with. I
well,
think that
we need
I
to
think
make a
dying slowly
differentiation
can be a
between
part
being
of
old
life.
and suffering the usual iniquities of age, the usual problems that come with advanced age, and between being in extreme pain because of a specific reason or illness in the last months of your life.
And
Okay?
who makes that decision?
Me as an individual.
Exactly.
So you were talking that seeing your close person is suffering is so hard that euthanasia offers you.
Not offers me. If that
Better way
so
of
if I
feeling
have
about
a
it.
family member that is suffering from a terminal illness and is obviously suffering through every day and every moment, I wouldn't want to just keep them there just because of my selfishness and just because I love them and I want them to stay by my side, even though they're obviously suffering. No, I want them to have the chance to choose and end their suffering.
Do children have a right?
Travis, how would you respond to Nora, though? Because I know you were trying to go somewhere with that. If a close family member asked you,
Okay. I know it comes, just like you said, it comes from an extremely selfish side, an emotional side. I believe that if you give someone the choice to choose to die, that you don't actually give them the option to live. Too many people focus on the death part and not the life part. Yes, we argued just before we went into the armories about the separate sides that, yes, the cases where someone does come out from a perpetual vegetative state, for instance,
Mr. Pistorius
Pistorius.
from South Africa.
that, yeah, the media or people are going to focus on these extreme cases. But the reason why I said on a more personal level is because if you are directly faced, I was directly faced with something like this. I don't know if I should go too personal on this. Like I said, it just comes from a very selfish standpoint. But the overall argument that I appeal to you guys is that when it's a family member that is really close to you and the person confides in you, they're asking you advice. Should I or shouldn't I? And if there's the slightest chance that they have maybe some type of treatment, or even another argument can be because you say that I choose to die, that maybe research for certain treatments that that person is going through is actually going to be diminished. That researchers and doctors aren't necessarily going to try to cure the disease, but just use it as an excuse to just say, okay, I don't want to take care of this person. They choose to die, let's just let them do it.
If there's uncertainty, of course the first speech should be positive and should always be trying to find a
Well, I
solution.
think before you actually make that choice, yes, I choose to die, that it should be well thought out,
Yeah, of
like you were
course.
saying
Agree.
before,
Yeah.
and that there should be definitely maybe psychological counseling,
Counseling.
that you're able to make those decisions, because none of us, I don't believe, have been faced with a terminal illness, that you have to come to the reality that I don't have that much time left. I don't know when that day's going to be. I just choose to die when I feel so much despair and that I have no option. That there is absolutely no other choice than to choose to die. Where I say, I don't think you should have that choice. I think we should encourage to try to allow them to be able to live, if there is that slightest chance, because I think we all would take that, especially if it was someone who was very close to us.
I agree with Travis. So
That's
that
absolutely you're right. As an adult with a family member in a situation like that, or as an individual experiencing something like that, it's absolutely your right and should be part of any sensible person's process when encountering something of that nature. Nevertheless, you are still an autonomous individual, and you deserve the right to have that option available to you.
Even if your judgment is clouded.
Even if your judgment is clouded. So right now, my judgment isn't clouded, okay? I have a conversation with my fiance, and we're realistic. We recognize accidents do happen to people. Yeah. There's car crashes, there's whatever. Any number of things can happen to you, and these do happen to people, right? So you have to understand something like that might happen to you. So I don't want to be sustained for several years or decades in the hope of some cure coming if I'm in some sort of vegetative state. I just don't want to exist like that, okay? It's
well,
a perfectly rational decision. I'm making that rational decision right now.
If you have to if you have to make choice about your very close people like parents or child, how you will be feeling after that. I think I'm agree with Travis that finishing physical suffering of your close person doesn't mean the end of your moral suffering. Euthanasia can be even more moral suffering to you than witnessing physical suffering of your close relative.
I think moral suffering comes down to if your own morals damage you or affect you in that way, that's your burden to deal with, okay? But it's just as easy to argue and just as persuasive to argue that it's very humane to end someone's suffering, right?
So I think our shooters are kind of a little bit mixed about this issue, very sensitive and complex issue. So why don't we get some advice maybe, or let's hear what the people on the street think about this issue.
자신이 선택한다 했을 때 그건 일단 죄라고 생각하기 때문에
저는 예스, 통받기 싫어요.
정말 고통스러우면은 이제 그 고통에서 해방이 돼야 할 상황이 있잖아요. 그 고통은 본인이 감수해야 되는 거고, 그러니까 결정도 본인이 할 수 있다고 생각을 하는 거죠.
안락사 한다는 자체가 이미 병이 진행되고 죽음에 다다랐다는 상태잖아요. 그러면 이미 목숨을 연장해도 의미가 없다는 상태니까 그냥 편안하게 가는 게 가족도 좋고 저도 좋은 것 같아요.
Because I believe that God created us and only He could take away our life. It's not our choice, to do it ourselves.
저는 죽음이 무서워서 가족들이랑 좀 더 있다가 차라리 죽는 게 나을 것 같아서 생을 좀 더 함께 하고 싶어요.
I choose yes because I think if somebody wants to die and you keep them alive, that's almost like taking away a life of someone who wants to live. It's almost the same.
나로 인해서 가족들이나 다른 주변의 힘든 상황들을 고려할 때 그 삶의 의미가 없을 때는 저는 그게 어느 정도 기간이 정말 오래 간다면 그게 가능하다고 생각해서 선택을 한 거예요.
진짜 많이 아픈데 죽고 싶은데도 못 죽고 이러면 더 고통스럽잖아요.
It should be my right to choose the end of my life. It's a natural thing to do. It's not a religious thing. It's a natural thing.
So now that we saw what the average person on the street thinks, I wonder if their opinion has influenced yours. Was there any movement? What do you think? More
I actually felt kind of moved by seeing people confronting maybe the idea of their own death, more towards your side actually, thinking about the sobriety of making that choice. I'm not sure why, just I think seeing the faces is convincing to me in some
Were you
way.
surprised that more people seem to agree with the yes side? Were you surprised with that?
Yeah,
I was moved also seeing that people taking death so easily. They discuss, okay?
But I'm also surprised that people take pain and suffering so easily. On your side.
Not easily.
Do you want people to suffer?
Not
to death?
It was a very sunny day, and it's just like people.
You guys have the burden to explain to us why you want people to suffer to death.
Let me say again then. One of the things that bothered me was this idea that we're defining, because taking a life is like
ultimate thing, right? To life. And if we're basing that on suffering, to me it says we're really determining our life in terms of suffering or not.
That's your
What if
thing.
it can be cured? What if you're going to suffer for the end of your life and there's no way of easing that suffering?
Go to hospice.
You know, I think suffering's a part of life too. I'm not surprised that the answers from the people in the street were overwhelmingly yes. I'm not surprised that there's 96% of the French population agree with the law in France. And at the same time, whilst I applaud Belgium for its progressive nature, I think the decision to allow loneliness to be classified as a reason, the Netherlands, as a reason for opting out of life is incredibly worrying and incredibly troubling.
I mean, what message is that sending out to the increasing number of seniors who are tending to live by themselves, who will be lonely, who will be faced with, certain illnesses or decreasing quality of life?
Realistically speaking,
the Netherlands example perhaps shows us what happens when the stigma has been removed from that concept. You know, once the Band-Aid's been ripped off, so the stigma's gone, and perhaps they just have a more enlightened, rational understanding of what death is and how it exists in our society, how it exists for the individual, how it exists for people. And perhaps we shouldn't be scared of what that entails or what it means.
But I still think that argument, although compelling, look at the size of the country as opposed to other countries as well, and the legislation.
Well, the majority is not always right,
have to go through.
I mean,
but maybe also.
So that's still, we're talking about primarily the people that live there, which is ethnically speaking, would you say primarily white as well? Maybe a little bit better off than third world countries. So I mean, there are many factors that come into play.
Maybe actually including depression in the euthanasia may actually bring people that are depressed to actually go and see doctors proactively and say, I want to be euthanized, and then they would get the care that they wouldn't get if they were like the only option.
So a bait and switch, but that's a valid.
That's a valid argument.
I think it could have a counter result. You know, if you wanna, if there's a regulation that says if you want to go and euthanize yourself, right, you need to have to see
maybe it's just
you
a
need to have
trap,
consultancy,
not a trap, but kind of like luring them into
therapist,
the real system.
A therapist, then maybe you will have like a control.
That is a very drastic step.
There is a lot of
it worked with others.
There's such a massive cultural and religious and moral stigma about suicide. But if this idea of the act of taking your own life was just part of a rational discussion so that anybody who was contemplating suicide, even someone who was depressed, knew that they could go and start a process, and part of that process was discussion and a process
and maybe
of
they'll
discovery.
change their mind.
Let's take the example of the Dutch, the Netherlands once again. They've actually decriminalized, or they allowed euthanasia for teenagers from the age of 12 to 15 with parental approval, of course. Now imagine that you have a child in the throes of teenagerdom and whatever, and they say, Dad, Mom, I want to be euthanized.
I have right to die. That's
they
horrible.
do.
But maybe that's better if it actually brings them to have a dialogue with their parents rather than.
I think
that's an interesting idea, actually.
Yeah.
I mean, this idea that we're not stigmatizing or, we're dealing with it in just an adult way. This is what death is.
So life is take it or leave it, yes or no, flip the dial.
No, it's not.
No.
Because we have a dialogue.
This is the opposite what we're saying. We're saying that
time.
it's actually better to have some kind of a system around euthanasia where it allows people who want to opt into euthanasia to have some sort of discussion with parents and loved ones, and maybe...
I think they should have discussions anyways, though, without euthanasia.
Specifically regarding that
go straight for it.
topic, right? And then maybe that will end up swaying them from their decision. Maybe not, but either way, we think it could have...
One of the differences between euthanasia and suicide is that anybody can commit suicide, we can't stop them, but euthanasia is society saying, yes, this is okay. You're 16, we have hundreds of years of cultural knowledge, and we say this is okay. I need to decide whether you can or not.
Well, basically because we are pro-life and we think that life is important and life is a supreme value, right? Alongside other rights like freedom of choice. we want to regulate euthanasia because we believe that it's going to have more benefits. It will probably stop people from opting into suicide, and those who actually want to commit suicide or feel really bad about their life will have the chance or the choice to go through that process, where by the end of the process they can be fully informed regarding to their options and make that decision along with their parents and professionals.
It's strange. It's so ironic what you're saying, but actually, when I think about it, we can't stop people from committing suicide.
It's happening already.
Right, it's already happening. So if what you're saying is that euthanasia is a way to acknowledge suicide through regulation, right? That's compelling to me. I could buy into that. There's some things I don't
see
quite agree
actually
with,
people
but
who are contemplating suicide, but then they actually see people in dire need that choose to die because of their circumstances of a terminal illness. Maybe it actually convinced the person not to commit suicide. Hey, maybe my life isn't that bad.
Yeah.
Shooters, we've reached bullseye. Wow.
Okay.
You seem surprised, but the yes team has won over the no team. So now all
You're
that's
not
left, of
surprised.
course, is to...
The debate champion.
Yeah, it seems like freedom of choice.
well
and
argued. It was well argued.
Thank you.
The choice to a dignified death has won over. So now, of course, what we need to do is to draft a one statement that will reflect all of our opinions. And since you do have the upper hand, why don't you come up with a statement and we can
So I
maybe
guess
modify
our
that?
key phrase, our key argument, I guess, is still central, right? So we
right to
believe
die.
that it's a human right. It's a fundamental human right. Everyone has the right to die.
Just as they have the right to live. So.
And our key argument was that life is sacred.
But we also agree that life is sacred, and this is why we want to regulate euthanasia, so that it's not a random thing and everyone who's...
So it should be very strictly regulated.
I think that regulations definitely should have some
Needs to
added
be
psychological care, that there will be like a
Counseling.
deliberation period maybe.
Yeah.
And then, of course, consent with many different doctors, not just one opinion, but
Yeah.
maybe more than one.
Multiple opinions.
And can we acknowledge the sort of many pitfalls? I mean, that we're sort of walking a very narrow line in trying to do a good thing with legalizing euthanasia, but that there are so many places that we can actually, the slippery slopes, as they were. Maybe in our statement, if we can acknowledge, not by name, but that there are so many ways that this can get derailed.
But I
That has to
think-
be done carefully.
I think what Jana said was, if regulated strictly, that's probably the key way to avoid these slippery slopes.
What were you convinced by? Was it the legalization part?
I was already on the fence, to be honest. I think I came from more of a standpoint that it's possible that if you make it too easy, that there's less research on actually helping
Right.
those who are going through terminal illnesses. Instead of trying to find a cure, you just use it as an excuse to allow it to happen. But because maybe I was more personally involved, I don't think I argued that much because I just didn't want to let my emotions be involved in terms of my answers. So.
Sincerely, I was convinced by video and by choice of many Korean young people on the street. So I was thinking, while euthanasia is absolutely taboo in Russia, which is explained by Russian Orthodox faith and the general perception of life and death, but I was
just
thinking
changed
our
you
society
today.
now is changing. We are more diverse, so we have to make room for different perceptions.
Right. Okay. So, Noor, what was that statement again? Maybe we can read it out
Right.
again.
Euthanasia should be legalized to allow us exercise our right to die.
Everyone in agreement with that? Shooters?
Yes.
Yeah, I think I can live with that. Yeah.
Okay.
Did we put the amendment on there though?
Well, by legalize, we mean regulate.
Right.
I
I think that
Yes.
includes it.
Legalizing,
legalize has got
which
legal
means
in it, so-
regulating.
Regulations.
Lots of regulation. So, shooters, we have reached the one statement to our question. And euthanasia should be legalized to exercise our right to die. And it's another heavy topic, but I thank you for your opinions and this heated debate. We'll see you again next time.
Thank you.